because the way the universe works, I found myself in a place where I've needed to examine the depth of my compassion and mercy in situations that I've been faced with recently. I just, not too long ago, finished nearly 3 weeks of jury duty, during which I heard the story of a 20-year-old student on his way home who was shot by gang members who knew he was not part of any gang, but knew that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and therefore somehow deserved to die. Throughout the trial, as the story unfolded, I was very aware that no matter how heinous this crime seemed, I was still looking at a human being. This admittedly became more and more difficult as the details of the night unfolded and the sobs of the victims' families couldn't be ignored as the crime photos were projected onto the big screen. Inherent worth and dignity. Help me figure this one out. I also had to make a hard decision about following through with an eviction of tenants who had stopped paying rent on my childhood home. Thinking about 3 children coming home from school and not going to the only home they had ever known tugged hard at my heart and my conscience. While discussing the difficulty I was having making this decision, the word enabling was tossed out. It was true, I had worked for years with these people, keeping the rent at a really ridiculously low amount, forgiving rent and late payments until the reality became I just couldn't afford to support them. And perhaps by my lenient ways, I was allowing them to keep up this pattern. Sometimes there seems it needs to be a limit to compassion and mercy. This was driven home when I saw they had returned the favors by trashing the house and leaving it in need of tens of thousands of dollars of repairs. Had my mercy for their situation served any of us well? It seems not, but again, I'm not sure. So while struggling with this, I was presented with a situation that tested my willingness to put my convictions, compassion, into action. So many of you know I'm part of the Friends of Orange County Detainee program that was started here at Tapestry. And for about a year, I've been visiting a young Ghanaian man who came seeking political asylum, who knows that by being sent home, it's likely to guarantee his death, who tells me that he told the judge in court, please, if you're going to send me back home, just kill me here and send what you would have spent on airfare home to my daughter. So when a couple of weeks ago I got a panic call from him, from the detention facility saying he needed an address of someone who knew him in the United States, someone who would vouch for him, help him upon his release, or he risked removal to Washington, D.C. for an undetermined length of time, there was a moment when I paused. Could I do this? This was way beyond what I had signed up for or what any of you will sign up for when you sign up to be a visitor. And could I make a leap of faith in this person whom I had known only through conversation across the table? Could I trust he is who he says he is? This decision, for whatever reason, seemed to be an easier one. I sent a letter to the immigration department saying that I would help him upon his release. What this means, I have yet to find out. But what I do know is that when you look into the eyes of another human being and they ask for our help, we need to find that mercy and that compassion within ourselves, however that looks for each of us. So I started by saying I'm in a bit of a compassion and mercy overload, and I tell you this not because I'm extraordinarily compassionate or merciful, but only to illustrate that each of us in our daily lives are called upon to make decisions about how we will walk in the world. These decisions look different for each of us, but we are presented with these more often than we may think. During the trial, I spoke to you about the prosecutor clarified the meaning of premeditation, citing the example of driving and coming to a yellow light. Will you slam on the brakes, or will you speed up in the hopes of making it through? The decision we make is premeditated. We pause for however brief a time, and in that time, make a decision about how we will act. And then we live with the consequences. When we see someone who needs our help, our compassion, our mercy, we make a premeditated decision about what our response will be. Reverend Wendy Williams, a Unitarian Universalist minister in Golden, Colorado, quotes the Dalai Lama, who says his religion is kindness, and each of us in our own way can try to spread compassion into people's hearts. Western civilization these days places a great importance on filling the human brain with knowledge, but not quite so much caring about filling the human heart with compassion. This is what the real role of religion is. Reverend Williams goes on to say that the Hebrew word hesed, most often translated as mercy, is actually translated as loving kindness. May I be filled with loving kindness. May you be filled with loving kindness. May we be filled with loving kindness. Loving kindness, mercy, is compassion with action. It's seeing need or pain, being moved by it, and responding to the call to correct it. In Rumors of Another World, Philip Yancey shares a specific story on relationship. As you know, Nelson Mandela, with the assistance of Bishop Desmond Tutu, convened the Truth and Reconciliation Commission at the end of apartheid. Amnesty, mercy, was a possibility, but could only be granted by the victims or their survivors after the perpetrator had told the whole truth in open court. One gruesome story was spoken by a police officer named Vanderbroek, who confessed to shooting an 18-year-old man and burning the body. 8 years later, he and others went after the father of the 18-year-old. Once they had him in custody, they collected the wife and forced her to watch as they set him ablaze. At the conclusion of Vanderbroek's confession, the widow was asked what she wanted. She asked to be taken to the place where her husband's body was burned so she could collect the dust and offer a proper burial. Once Vanderbroek agreed, she added, quote, "Mr. Vanderbroek took all my family away from me, and now I have no one. But I still have a lot of love to give. Twice a month, I would like for him to come to the ghetto and spend the day with me so I can be a mother to him. And I would like Mr. Vanderbroek to know that he is forgiven by God and that I forgive him too. And now I would like to embrace him so that he can know my forgiveness is real." Spontaneously, some of the courtroom began singing Amazing Grace as the elderly woman made her way up to the witness stand. But Vanderbroek didn't hear the hymn. He had fainted, overwhelmed. Loving kindness, mercy, compassion, and action. So I'm grateful to be part of this religious community. This community has made a difference in how I live. It has helped me look into another's eyes and seek to find loving kindness in my response to them. I'm still a work in progress, but this religion, this community, TapestryUU, have helped me to be a little bit better version of myself. Whatever that looks like for you, may that be so too.
I would like to present 3 short essays that begin with quotations and end in true UU fashion with questions. Number 1, thoughts on Christianity. In a recent sermon, Reverend Bruce Clear of All Souls Unitarian Church in Indianapolis said, "The religion that Jesus taught has to do with loving your enemies, caring for the needy, putting principle above wealth and power, accepting those who are different, showing mercy, and seeking justice. That religion is one that is shared by most Unitarian Universalists. After Jesus died, others came along and taught a different religion with a view that defined Jesus rather than his ideas as the object of worship. The original religion is still very much a part of us as UUs, but the religion that today seems to own the name Christianity has little to do with who we are." End of quote. I once asked an evangelical friend whether following the teachings of Jesus would make one a Christian. She told me that those teachings have nothing to do with it. What matters is that you take Christ as your personal Savior. In that way, you will have heavenly guidance and protection that will lead to everlasting life. The motivation underlying this is a selfish desire for personal gain. Jesus spoke of mercy and sacrifice, of giving to the needy, loving your enemy, and living in peace. But as Reverend Clear points out, the ideas of Jesus are not the basis of modern Christianity. Could this be a part of the reason there is a shortage of love and mercy in our world these days? If more people followed the teachings of Jesus, wouldn't humanity be better off? The ideas of Jesus are firmly embedded in our 7 principles. So although most UUs identify as humanists, are we the real Christians? Those who live the teachings rather than worship the teacher? If so, how well do we actually practice what we preach? Are we accepting of and merciful toward those who have a different view of the world from our own? Number 2, on the limits of mercy. Reverend Martin Levanhar of All Souls UU Church in Tulsa said, "Mercy is offered whether a person deserves it or not. In this sense, mercy runs counter to justice," end of quote. Unitarian Universalists revere justice. It is mentioned prominently in the second of our 7 principles. But then, so is compassion. A woman is abused and beaten repeatedly by her husband. In self-defense, she kills her attacker. Do we feel sympathy? And would we extend mercy toward her? What of the poor mentally ill soul who has visions and hears voices, who lacks the capability to tell right from wrong and reverts to murder? Our society often extends mercy and says that that person should be committed to an asylum rather than punished. But what about a Nazi judge responsible for the murder of thousands who followed the dictates of a repressive regime? But what if he did so because he feared for his own safety and that of his family had he not? Do we demand that a person risk their freedom or even their life to oppose evil? How many of us have had to choose between principles and imprisonment or death? Could we empathize with the judge, understand his motives for failing to take a stand for moral justice, and extend mercy to him? What of the maladjusted youth who joins a group that offers him acceptance and purpose in life, but teaches that Western governments oppress and kill Muslims in the Middle East, and therefore that their citizens are worthy targets? So he plants bombs at the Boston Marathon or beheads hostages in Syria. But he was brainwashed and was doing what he felt was morally right. Is he worthy of mercy? I sympathize with the abused woman and with the mentally ill individual. However, I have difficulty extending mercy to either the Nazi or the terrorist, despite extenuating circumstances, and suspect many others may feel the same way. We are programmed to elevate justice, even vengeance, above compassion. It's not easy living the teachings of Jesus. Unlike the South African widow that Cheryl talked about, I, along with many others, am just not there yet. To assure the safety and stability of society, we need justice. To assure compassion in human relations, we must temper it with mercy. But exactly where do we draw the line between them? 3, what if? Reverend Levanhar also said, in a place like modern-day Israel, with its history of division and violence, if justice must prevail in order for people to live in peace and harmony, there may never be peace. At some point, someone has to say, too much has happened, and now justice alone is out of reach. The best we can hope for now is to seek and offer mercy. End of quote. If we could somehow temper cold justice with compassion, could we not solve many of the world's problems? The dehumanizing of others provides justification for hatred, killing, and persecution. Empathy is the enemy of dehumanization and is the source of mercy. Through empathy, could Muslims come to understand the plight of Jews who have suffered for centuries and recognize Israel's right to exist, mercifully ceding to its Jewish citizens the homeland they have long sought? Could Israelis empathize with Palestinians occupied and living in squalor in a theocracy biased in favor of European Jews and mercifully let them have their own independent state? Could mercy help the desire for peace to overcome the desire for revenge? The Truth and Reconciliation Councils of South Africa, which Cheryl mentioned, were a tribute to justice married to compassion and brought peace to that troubled land. Could mercy, born of that same marriage, also bring an end to conflicts in Ukraine, the Middle East, and Africa? Could it offer hope to countless thousands of refugees from Myanmar, Libya, Syria, and Eritrea, and to the undocumented thousands languishing in our detention centers? Could it change our penal system from one of retribution to one of rehabilitation? Perhaps mercy really could save our troubled world. We desperately need more of it. But society has devalued mercy, so that today cold justice and vengeance are winning out. So how do we get people like you and me, to become more merciful?
Some of you know that I write essays. In writing essays, I frequently play what if. For instance, what if time travel were a reality? Where might I want to go, and who might I want to meet? Or what if there were 7 modern deadly sins to counterbalance the 7 traditional deadly sins? In that particular exercise, I included smirking, whining, and procrastination, among others, as the modern deadly sins. So, in preparing for today, I asked myself, what if there were a National Day of Mercy? What might that look like? And what kinds of activities might take place on such a day? First, to be truly merciful is something that requires practice. Karen Armstrong, in her book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, says that compassion is a practically acquired knowledge, like dancing. You must practice diligently day by day. Mercy is a close cousin to compassion, which you've heard both words used in the previous presentations. And it has the added component of a degree of authority or control being present with one of the people, with one having some degree of power over the other. So, like compassion, mercy takes some practice too. So maybe on a National Day of Mercy, we would have an opportunity to practice mindful acts of mercy to get a good grasp on how that feels. With a bit of brainstorming, you could think of any number of things that could take place on such a day. Parents might practice some mercy when deciding to punish their children for unruly behavior. You might be more apt to smile and say a kind word to a store clerk, or the young man who bags your groceries, or smile at a fast food worker as you zip through the drive-through at Taco Bell or Burger King or fast food venue of your choice. Or maybe you could leave a bigger tip for a waitress at your favorite dining spot. That's just for starters. Maybe state troopers and traffic cops would give out more verbal warnings and fewer citations on such a day. Maybe judges and juries in courts would award or consider awarding more lenient sentences. Maybe governors would stay executions. Maybe there would be no evictions from housing and apartments, or no bank foreclosures. Maybe debt collectors would take a day off from those nasty phone calls threatening to send out a big dog to bite your ankle if you don't pay up within 10 days. Maybe you could participate in a peaceful demonstration for a cause you believe in. If your job involves supervising others or managing the work of others, maybe you would be kinder in the way you explain to an employee how their behavior needs to change in order to improve work performance. If it is within their power, maybe some bosses would let employees leave a couple hours early to get a jump on traffic. Maybe you would buy 2 boxes of Girl Scout cookies instead of just one when you see a young Girl Scout standing outside a supermarket. Of course, you would give the second box away rather than eat both of them yourself. At animal shelters, maybe there would be no euthanasia procedures performed on the National Day of Mercy. Instead, maybe a focused effort would be placed on finding foster homes and adoption placements on that day. Maybe you would volunteer at a homeless shelter or a senior living facility. Or maybe you would be available to provide rides to different individuals for doctor's appointments. Maybe you would read to a person who has lost most of their sight to macular degeneration. Maybe you would do some grocery shopping for a homebound person. Maybe you would sign up for the detainee visitation program here at Tapestry and hopefully not face a moral dilemma. Or maybe you would take a training class to prepare for tutoring illiterates. Maybe you would join with others in sorting and donating clothing to a battered women's shelter. Maybe you would be merciful to your pet for chewing on your favorite shoes or scratching the furniture. Or maybe you could just listen with empathy to a coworker or a fellow Tapestry member who's going through a tough time in their lives. Showing mercy doesn't mean that on the National Day of Mercy, you have to put on your Mother Teresa frock and pick up the suffering on Skid Row and take them home with you. But you could start by becoming mindful of how you could be more warm and kind to the materially and spiritually poor here in Orange County, and with attaching real human faces to the concept of the worth and dignity of every person. We've had Taco Tuesday and Throwback Thursday now for quite some time, and we all know about Wednesday as Hump Day, so maybe you could add Merciful Monday to the mix. And Roger mentioned Meatless Monday. Merciful Monday goes nicely with that. So on Mondays, you would practice mindful, merciful acts diligently until they become part of your daily routine, as writer Karen Armstrong suggests. Mercy, what a concept. No, it's not just for saints anymore. Namaste and blessed be.